Welcome to our deep dive into a world I think we all came from, but rarely think about.
Yeah.
How do organisms reproduce?
Mm.
We're looking at a chapter from a biology textbook.
Okay.
It's simply titled, How Do Organisms Reproduce?
Right.
But before we get into the nuts and bolts of it all,
Yeah.
I think it's worth asking, like, why bother at all?
Yeah.
I mean, unlike eating or breathing,
Yeah.
reproduction isn't essential for an individual to survive.
That's what makes it so intriguing, right?
Yeah.
It's this huge energy investment for an organism.
Mm.
So the why behind reproduction really gets to the heart of what life is all about,
Yeah.
passing on those genes.
Okay, so it's about more than just like making copies. It's
Yeah.
about continuity,
Yeah.
legacy, all that.
Mm.
But how does that actually work
Right.
on like a biological level? The
Yeah.
chapter starts with DNA,
Correct.
calling it the blueprint of life.
And that's a really apt way to think about it.
Uh,
DNA hold all the instructions for building and maintaining an organism.
Right.
So reproduction at its core
Yeah.
is about copying those blueprints
Okay.
to pass on to the next generation.
So it's like hidden copy paste on life itself.
You could say that.
Talk about efficiency.
Yeah,
But the chapter also mentioned that DNA copying isn't perfect.
right.
There are these little errors that happen.
And that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Those tiny imperfections are what lead to variations
Mhm.
between a parent and offspring.
Okay.
Now, you might think errors are bad,
Right.
but these variations are actually the fuel for evolution.
Yeah.
They're the reason we have such incredible diversity of life on Earth.
Got it.
Right.
So those little mistakes are actually kind of important in the grand scheme of things.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about how organisms actually go about reproducing.
Right.
The chapter talks about asexual reproduction. Is that essentially creating a clone of yourself?
You could say that. Asexual reproduction is all about generating offspring from a single parent. It's super common in single-celled organisms.
Okay.
Think about amoeba.
Right.
They literally split themselves in half.
Yeah.
It's called binary fission.
Simple and to the point, kind of like tearing a piece of dough in half to
Right.
make two rolls. But the chapter mentioned bacteria do something similar,
Yeah.
also called binary fission.
Right.
Is there a difference?
There is.
Okay.
With amoeba, that split can happen anywhere on any plane.
Yeah.
But bacteria like Leishmania are a bit more organized.
Okay.
They have this whip-like structure that dictates where the split happens.
So it's less like randomly tearing dough
Yeah.
and more like carefully slicing it.
Right.
But it's still asexual.
Wow.
One parent making an exact copy.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there are even more variations on the theme.
Yeah.
The malarial parasite does something called multiple fission.
Okay.
Imagine a cell exploding into tons of daughter cells at once.
Wow. That's quite the fireworks show on a microscopic level.
Right.
And then there's yeast. Instead of splitting, they bud.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like a tiny house sprouting off the main one.
Okay.
It shows you just how diverse those strategies can be,
Yeah.
even within asexual reproduction.
So asexual reproduction seems to work well
Yeah.
for single-celled organisms.
Yeah.
Does this also apply to multicellular organisms?
Well, some simpler multicellular organisms, like a type of algae called Spirogyra,
Okay.
can reproduce by fragmentation.
Right.
They break into pieces,
Yeah.
and each piece can become a new individual.
Okay, so it's like breaking a cookie
Right.
and getting a whole new cookie from each piece.
Yeah.
But I imagine that doesn't work for more complex organisms.
You're right.
Yeah.
If you have specialized cells and organs,
Right.
you can't just split in half
Yeah.
and expect everything to function.
That's a good point. So how do more complex multicellular organisms reproduce asexually?
They've evolved some pretty amazing methods.
Hmm.
The chapter mentions regeneration.
Okay.
Take Hydra and Planaria, for example.
Right.
You can cut them into pieces,
Yeah.
and each piece can grow into a whole new organism.
Whoa, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So it's like having a superpower.
Right.
You get injured, lose a part,
Mm.
and just grow a new one.
It's a great example of how adaptable life can be,
Yeah.
and it all comes down to those specialized regenerative cells
Right.
that can essentially rebuild the entire body plan.
That makes me wonder
Mm.
if they can do it.
Yeah.
Why can't we?
Right.
But I guess that's a question for another deep dive.
It's another episode.
What other methods are there?
Well, similar to yeast,
Hmm.
some multicellular organisms reproduce through budding.
Okay.
Hydra, for instance, can grow tiny versions of themselves
Right.
that eventually detach and become independent.
So it's like carrying your mini-me around. until they're ready to go solo.
Yeah.
The chapter also talked about something called vegetative propagation in plants.
This is where it gets really interesting for anyone who loves gardening or agriculture.
Hmm.
Essentially parts of a plant,
Yeah.
its roots, its stems or leaves,
Okay.
can develop into whole new plants under the right conditions.
Wait, so you're telling me I could potentially grow a whole new plant from a cutting?
Exactly.
Sign me up for that gardening class.
It's a common way to propagate plants that don't produce seeds,
Mm-hmm.
like bananas and oranges.
Okay.
You can also produce fruit-bearing plants much quicker this way.
So it's like a natural cloning technique.
Right.
You know, there was this one plant, Bryophyllum,
Hmm.
that really caught my eye.
Yeah.
It can actually grow new plants from buds on its leaves.
It's a remarkable adaptation.
Yeah.
But plants aren't the only ones with clever dispersal strategies.
Right.
The chapter also mentions spore formation,
Okay.
like in the common bread mold Rhizopus.
Right. Spores.
Yeah.
They're like these tiny, durable packages
Mhm.
containing cells that can develop into new individuals when they land in the right spot.
And this brings us back to that why reproduce question.
Yeah.
For organisms like mold that can't move around freely, spores are an amazing way to spread far and wide.
Right.
It increases their chances of survival, especially in unpredictable environments.
Okay, so we've seen how diverse and strange asexual reproduction can be. But the chapter also talks about sexual reproduction.
Right.
What's the key difference here?
Sexual reproduction involves two individuals,
Okay.
each contributing germ cells. These are special cells with half the usual number of chromosomes to
Yeah.
create a new generation.
So it's like mixing ingredients to create something new.
You got it.
Okay.
Sexual reproduction is like shuffling a deck of cards.
Hmm.
It creates new combinations of variations,
Right.
which, as we discussed, is essential for evolution.
Yeah,
It speeds up that whole process.
that makes sense. But if you're combining DNA from two parents, wouldn't the amount of DNA just keep doubling with each generation?
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And you've hit upon a challenge that sexual reproduction had to overcome. The solution,
Yeah.
meiosis.
Okay.
It's a specialized type of cell division that halves the number of chromosomes in germ cells.
Right.
So when those germ cells combine, the offspring inherit the correct amount of DNA.
Wow. Meiosis.
Yeah.
It's like nature's way of keeping things organized.
Right.
So I've got asexual reproduction, which is all about making clones, and sexual reproduction, which is about mixing things up.
Exactly.
But how does this play out in different organisms?
Let's start with the birds and the bees,
Okay.
or rather the flowers and the
Yeah.
more flowers.
Okay.
The chapter takes a close look at sexual reproduction in flowering plants, or angiosperms as they're scientifically known.
I have to admit, as much as I love a good bouquet, I've never really thought about the mechanics of flower sex.
Well, first you have the stamen, which is the male part of the flower.
Okay.
It produces pollen grains,
Right.
and those pollen grains contain the male germ cells.
And then there's the pistil?
Yeah.
The female part?
The female part.
It has a sticky top called the stigma,
Right.
a tube called the style,
Yeah,
and at the base, the ovary containing ovules with the egg cells.
exactly.
So the pollen needs to get from the stamen to the pistil.
Right.
How does that work?
That's where pollination comes in.
Okay.
It's the transfer of pollen from the stamen to the stigma.
Mm.
This can happen within the same flower,
Okay.
which is called self-pollination.
Right.
Or it can happen between different flowers,
Yeah.
which is called cross-pollination.
Okay.
Often this is helped along by wind, water, or animals.
So those bees buzzing around are actually playing a vital role in plant reproduction.
Exactly.
It's like they're nature's matchmakers. But what happens once that pollen lands on the stigma?
That's where it gets really fascinating. The pollen grain grows a tube down through the style
Okay.
to reach the ovary for fertilization.
It's like sending a tiny message through a tube.
Yeah.
So once the pollen reaches the ovary, what happens?
That's when fertilization happens.
Okay.
The sperm cell from the pollen grain fuses with the egg cell in the ovule, and then things get even more interesting.
Yeah.
The fertilized egg, now called a zygote,
Okay.
develops into an embryo within the ovule.
All right.
The ovule itself becomes a seed, and the ovary develops into the fruit.
Wow. So from a tiny pollen grain to a juicy fruit.
Right.
That's quite a transformation.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears from plants to humans.
Okay.
The chapter also covers human reproduction, starting with puberty.
Puberty.
Right.
That exciting yet often awkward transition into adulthood.
Yeah.
It's all about sexual maturation. signaling that we're reaching reproductive age.
So all those changes, hair growth, skin changes,
Uh-huh.
breast development in girls, and facial hair and voice changes in boys?
Right.
It's all part of becoming, well, sexually mature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not just the outward changes. There are also hormonal shifts happening that can affect emotions and behavior.
Makes sense. It's a time of huge change, both inside and out.
Yeah.
But beyond those external signs,
Right.
what's actually happening inside our bodies to prepare for reproduction?
Yeah.
What about the specialized organs involved?
Well, let's start with the male reproductive system.
Okay.
In males, you have the testes,
Right.
which are responsible for producing sperm. Those tiny cells carrying the male's genetic information.
Right.
The testes also produce testosterone,
Okay.
the hormone responsible for many of the masculine changes during puberty.
The testes seem pretty important.
Right.
Why are they located outside the body cavity?
Right.
In the scrotum?
It's actually a clever bit of evolutionary design. Sperm are sensitive to temperature.
Okay.
And need to be kept a bit cooler than normal body temperature.
Right.
That's why the scrotum hangs outside the body.
Yeah.
Providing that perfect temperature control.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But once those sperm are produced, they need a way to, well, get to the egg.
Yeah. What's the delivery system?
Yeah.
You're right. The vas deferens acts like a highway for sperm,
Okay.
connecting the testes to the urethra,
Right.
which also carries urine. Along the way, there are glands like the prostate and seminal vesicles
Yeah.
that add fluids to nourish and help transport the sperm.
So it's a team effort.
It is.
Now, what about the female reproductive system?
In females, the ovaries are the key players. They have two important jobs.
Okay.
Producing eggs,
Right.
which contain the female's genetic material, and releasing hormones like estrogen and progesterone.
So the ovaries are like the female equivalent of the testes. They're both responsible for producing gametes and hormones.
Exactly.
Each month, an ovary releases a mature egg.
Right.
And it travels down the fallopian tube towards the uterus.
Uh-huh.
The fallopian tube is typically where fertilization occurs.
Yeah.
It's like the meeting point for sperm and egg.
That's a great way to put it.
So it's like a delicate dance with the egg waiting in the fallopian tube for the sperm to arrive.
And if fertilization happens, the fertilized egg or zygote, that's the single cell formed when the sperm and egg fuse, continues its journey to the uterus.
Right.
The uterus is a remarkable organ,
capable
of expanding and nurturing a growing fetus for 9 months.
Speaking of nurturing,
Right.
the chapter mentioned the placenta. What role does it play?
The placenta is absolutely crucial.
Okay.
It's the connection between the mother and the developing embryo,
Right.
responsible for nutrient and waste exchange. It acts like the baby's lifeline, providing everything it needs to grow and thrive.
It's incredible how our bodies are designed to support new life.
It is.
But what happens if fertilization doesn't occur?
Well, in that case, the egg disintegrates. And the uterine lining, which had thickened in preparation for a potential pregnancy, is shed during menstruation.
Okay.
It's a natural cycle that repeats roughly every month.
So menstruation is like the body hitting the reset button.
You could say that.
It's all part of this intricate dance of hormones and biological processes.
Right.
But human reproduction is more than just biology, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's also about choices and responsibility.
Yeah, the chapter touches on the importance of making responsible choices about sexual activity, considering the potential risks of sexually transmitted infections
Right.
and unplanned pregnancies.
It's definitely a topic that's important to discuss openly and honestly.
Hmm.
There are so many factors to consider, both for ourselves and for our partners.
Absolutely right.
And that leads us to a conversation about contraception and family planning. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the basics of DNA to the complexities of human reproduction.
It's a lot to take in.
But before we move on to contraception and family planning,
Go.
Let's take a quick pause.
Right.
We'll be right back to delve even deeper into this fascinating world.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating world of reproduction.
Right, because knowledge is power.
It is.
Especially when it comes to, our own bodies and health.
Exactly.
The chapter mentions several different methods of contraception.
Right, and these methods offer individuals, greater control over their reproductive choices. For instance, condoms are a common barrier method,
Right.
preventing sperm from reaching the egg.
Condoms,
Yeah.
they're like those tiny raincoats for sperm, right?
Let's say that.
Preventing those swimmers from reaching their destination.
Right.
What other options are there?
Well, there are hormonal methods like oral contraceptive pills.
Okay.
They work by altering hormone levels to prevent ovulation.
So no egg release.
Right.
No chance of fertilization.
Exactly.
Pretty clever.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about the copper T. Is that another hormonal method?
Actually, the copper T is a small device that's inserted into the uterus.
Okay.
It creates an environment that's hostile to sperm,
Right.
preventing fertilization.
It's amazing how many different approaches have been developed to help people manage their reproductive health.
Yeah, it really speaks to, the ingenuity of science.
Right. And it really underscores the importance of having access to accurate information and resources.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up our deep dive,
Yeah.
I wanted to revisit a point from earlier. We talked about how sexual reproduction helps speed up evolution
Right.
by creating new combinations of variations. But how does that actually play out in the real world?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Think about it this way.
Okay.
Imagine a population of organisms with variations in their traits.
Right.
Let's say we're looking at a field of wildflowers.
Okay. Some with brighter petals than others.
Okay, I could picture that.
Yeah.
A beautiful meadow with wildflowers of all shades.
Now, if pollinators like bees are more attracted to those brighter petals, those flowers are more likely to get pollinated. So the brighter flowers have a better chance of reproducing.
Exactly. They have a reproductive advantage.
Right.
That means they're more likely to pass on their genes, including the genes for brighter petals to the next generation.
Oh, okay.
Over time, you might start to see more and more flowers with those brighter petals in the meadow.
It's like those brighter flowers are winning the popularity contest. You could say that. But wouldn't pollinators be attracted to other factors, like the scent of a flower?
Right?
How do those traits compete with color in this whole evolutionary game?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Natural selection isn't just about one trait. It's about the whole package.
Okay.
It's about how all those different traits interact
Right.
and influence an organism's chances of survival and reproduction in a given environment.
So it's not just about random chance.
Right.
The environment plays a huge role in shaping which variations become more common over time.
Exactly.
Okay.
And remember, sexual reproduction with all that mixing and matching of genes
Right.
provides the raw material for natural selection to work its magic. It's like constantly experimenting with new combinations
Yeah.
to see what works best in a particular environment.
Wow. It really highlights the interconnectedness of it all.
It does.
So we've gone from the basics of DNA replication to this grand sweep of evolution.
Right.
It's amazing how much we've been able to unpack from just one chapter on reproduction.
It really does show you how interconnected these biological concepts are.
Yeah.
Reproduction isn't just about creating offspring.
Right.
It's about ensuring the continuation and adaptation of life itself.
Speaking of adaptation, let's talk about some of those incredible reproductive strategies we touched on earlier. I'm still blown away by those regenerative powers of Hydra and Planaria.
Right.
It's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Their ability to regrow entire body parts from fragments is mind-boggling.
Right.
It really makes you wonder what medical breakthroughs we could achieve
Yeah.
if we could unlock those secrets in humans.
Maybe someday we'll have that superpower.
Right.
But for now, it remains this fascinating example of how resilient and adaptable life can be.
Exactly.
What about vegetative propagation in plants? It's like they've figured out their own version of cloning.
It's a remarkably efficient strategy, especially for plants in stable environments.
Yeah.
And it's not just limited to simple plants.
Right.
Even trees like aspens can reproduce vegetatively, forming entire groves of genetically identical individuals
Wow.
connected by a single root system.
It's like they form their own little community, all clones of each other.
Yeah.
And that brings us to spore formation,
Right.
another amazing dispersal technique. Those tiny spores can travel incredibly long distances, carried by wind or water.
Think about fungi and ferns. They release these microscopic spores.
Right.
They can spread to new environments,
Yeah.
increasing their chances of survival.
Are we?
It's a brilliant adaptation, especially for organisms that can't move around on their own.
So from simple binary fission to complex sexual reproduction,
Right.
each of these strategies highlights the incredible diversity and ingenuity of life.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to that fundamental drive.
Right.
To continue to diversify and to thrive
Yeah.
in an ever-changing world.
It's inspiring to think about the sheer variety of life.
It is.
And all the ways organisms have evolved to ensure the survival of their species.
Right.
But amidst all this diversity, there are some common threads.
You're right.
Yeah.
Whether it's a single-celled bacterium dividing in half,
Right.
or a pair of humans bringing a new life into the world, it all boils down to transmitting genetic information from one generation to the next. It's that essential process that connects all living things,
Right.
past, present, and future.
And that brings us back to the question we started with. Why reproduce at all?
The answer, as we've seen, is multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's about survival adaptation and ensuring that the flame of life continues to burn brightly for generations to come.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of information and insights.
It adds.
And I feel like we've only just begun to explore the vast world of reproduction.
There's always more to learn.
Right.
But before we wrap things up,
Yeah.
I'd like to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit us with it.
All right?
What's the question? All right, so what's that thought-provoking question we're leaving our listeners with?
If you could choose any organism's reproductive strategy for a day, which would you pick?
Yeah.
And why?
Okay.
Think about it. Would you go for the regenerative powers of a starfish?
Right.
The efficient budding of a hydra? Or maybe the airborne dispersal of a dandelion seed?
Now that's something to ponder.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm leaning towards those regenerative powers. Imagine being able to heal from any injury.
Right.
Regrow a lost limb.
Yeah.
That would be incredible.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really highlights just how diverse and creative those reproductive strategies can be. And each one is perfectly adapted to that organism's niche in the world.
It's amazing how evolution has come up with so many different solutions to the same problem, passing on those genes to the next generation.
It's incredible.
But, you know, we've talked a lot about the biology of reproduction, mechanics of it all. But for humans, it's not just about biology, is it?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Reproduction for humans is deeply intertwined with our culture, our values, our beliefs.
Right.
Think about the different family structures that exist around the world. The customs surrounding marriage. The ways we raise our children.
Right.
All those things are part of the human story of reproduction.
And those cultural and social factors also influence how we think about reproductive health and make decisions about family planning. Access to contraception, information about sexual health, family planning services. These things aren't the same everywhere.
You're right. There are disparities around the world. And those disparities can have a significant impact on individuals and communities. It affects everything from population growth to women's empowerment, access to health care, and so much more.
It's a reminder that reproduction, even at its most basic level, is always part of a bigger picture.
It is.
It's connected to social justice, economics, and even politics.
Absolutely. Reproduction is this incredibly rich and complex topic that touches on biology, culture, ethics, and even politics. And as our understanding of reproduction evolves, so too will our approaches to all these complex issues surrounding it.
Well said.
Thank you.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey.
It has.
From the intricate dance of DNA replication to the vast canvas of evolution and the multifaceted world of human reproduction.
It's been quite a ride.
We've explored the incredible diversity of life's reproductive strategies, the remarkable adaptations that have emerged over millions of years, and the ethical considerations that shape our choices about family planning and reproductive health.
It's a lot to consider.
It's been a whirlwind of information and insights.
It has.
And I truly hope our listeners have come away with a newfound appreciation for the wonder and complexity of reproduction.
I hope so too.
Maybe we've even sparked some curiosity. Encouraged some further exploration of this incredible world we all came from.
And perhaps a touch of awe at the intricate dance of life that continues to unfold all around us. After all, reproduction is the foundation of that dance. The driving force behind the continuation of life itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we leave you with that final thought. If you could choose any organism's reproductive strategy for a day, what would it be and why? Think about it. Explore those possibilities. And let that curiosity guide you.
Keep on learning.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep on learning.